A study conducted in Sweden on 22 patients suffering autoimmunity with fatigue, 28 subjects suffering fatigue without standard markers of autoimmunity, 22 workers occupationally exposed to various metals complaining of tiredness, concentration issues with other symptoms, and 13 healthy controls, found that there was a high likelihood that the immune system of all suffering fatigue was sensitized to mercury and nickel. For those who were able to lessen or reduce ongoing exposures to these metals, their symptoms significantly improved. In another study conducted in Sweden on 50 patients with chronic fatigue syndrome and 73 controls who were skin patch tested for allergic reactions to 9 metals, it was found that patients with chronic fatigue syndrome were significantly more likely than healthy controls to be allergic to nickel. In research on 147 patients with chronic fatigue syndrome and 80 healthy controls conducted in the USA, it was found that patients with chronic fatigue syndrome have markers in their blood that indicate ongoing immune system activation, which can explain the fatigue and other symptoms associated with chronic fatigue syndrome. These markers were not significantly altered in those with more mild symptoms. The Department of Dermatology of a hospital in Sweden conducted a study on 50 patients suffering chronic fatigue syndrome and 73 controls. It was found that chronic fatigue syndrome patients, when undergoing mercury amalgam tooth filling removal or skin testing for allergies to metals, experienced a much higher rate of adverse symptoms than healthy controls. The symptoms experienced overlapped with worsening of the chronic fatigue syndrome. The reactions are likely a result of increased exposure to metals the patients were already sensitized to. In another study from Sweden on 513 patients with chronic fatigue syndrome-like symptoms who underwent dental restoration to remove metal-containing products from their mouths, it was found chronic fatigue syndrome-like symptoms improved and immune cell reactivity to metals decreased upon follow-up. In a study from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases in the USA on 27 patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, it was found that patients with chronic fatigue syndrome displayed a much higher level of immune response to common allergens than the general population. The study suggests that the immune system of chronic fatigue syndrome sufferers is reacting excessively to common substances. These reactions may be responsible for the array of symptoms seen in chronic fatigue syndrome patients. A review conducted in 2015 looking at the research available on immune system activation in chronic fatigue syndrome found that TGF-beta was found to be elevated in chronic fatigue syndrome sufferers. TGF-beta is a cytokine which modulates the function of the immune system. Increased levels of these molecules stimulate inflammation and immune system activation. In another study conducted in Sweden, it was found that patients suffering fibromyalgia had a higher rate of allergies to synthetic compounds and metals used in dental work. Fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome have a significant overlap and are likely slightly different manifestations of the same condition. A study conducted in China reviewing data from a national health database found patients suffering symptoms of atopy were more likely to later develop chronic fatigue syndrome. Atopy is the disposition of the immune system to develop allergic antibody-based immune responses. In a study conducted in Italy on patients with multiple chemical sensitivity, which is often present in those suffering chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, found almost all subjects had allergic sensitization to one or more metals. The way chronic fatigue syndrome starts is indicative of it being an allergic or immunological condition. Usually, chronic fatigue syndrome is triggered by an exposure to an acute stressor. Generally, the stressor which triggers the disease is 1. An acute illness or infection, 2. Acute physical injury like a car crash, 3. Use of pharmaceutical drugs, 4. Use of recreational drugs, 5. Excessive sleep deprivation. 6. Vaccination. 7. Significant exposure to a toxic substance. Animal studies show that acute stresses lead to a depletion of cellular antioxidants, and this depletion of antioxidants skews the response of the immune system and leads to the immune system producing antibodies against pathogens or foreign substances. These acute stresses are likely to initiate the ongoing immune response we see in chronic fatigue syndrome patients. Research conducted in 2011 on 56 chronic fatigue syndrome sufferers and 37 controls found plasma peroxide levels, which is a marker of oxidative stress, was significantly elevated in the chronic fatigue syndrome patients compared to the controls. A study conducted in Korea of 103 patients suffering fatigue of unknown origins compared to 82 controls found that the sufferers of fatigue had significantly higher levels of multiple markers of oxidative stress and dramatically depleted levels of antioxidants and antioxidant producing enzymes. TNF-alpha, an inflammatory molecule released by immune system cells, was more than 2 times higher in sufferers of fatigue. A study conducted in Australia on 33 patients diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and 27 controls found significantly higher levels of a number of markers of increased oxidative stress in chronic fatigue syndrome sufferers. As depletion of cellular antioxidants is likely to lead to dysfunctional immune responses, it is critically important for chronic fatigue syndrome sufferers to restore levels of cellular antioxidants. Restore antioxidant levels by increasing antioxidant intake in the diet by consuming ample amounts of herbs, vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. Consume beverages that contain a high amount of antioxidants like cocoa, various teas, and coffee. Restore cellular antioxidants by ensuring you consume ample amounts of vitamins, minerals, and cofactors required for optimal function of cellular antioxidant producing enzymes. Consider taking a full spectrum multivitamin, multimineral. Reduce exposure to substances which deplete your antioxidants like alcohol, recreational drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, herbicides, pesticides, and environmental pollutants. Ensure you are sleeping 7 to 9 hours per night. Reduce any activities which cause you stress. Drink filtered water. Ensure ample relaxation time. Consider taking a supplement which supports antioxidant levels in the body with such ingredients as NAC, CoQ10, vitamin C, A, and E, and herbal extracts. Reduce exposure to electromagnetic frequencies. Reduce the body burden of persistent environmental pollutants. Most environmental pollutants will leave your body in days or weeks once exposure has been ceased. However, there are a large number of these environmental pollutants that persist in the body for years or multiple decades, such as mercury, lead, cadmium, aluminium, thallium, gadolinium, dioxins, non-stick chemicals, and PCBs. As the environment has been polluted with these persistent pollutants for decades or centuries, it is almost inevitable we will be exposed to them on an ongoing basis. As they are so slow to be excreted from the body, this leads to an inevitable buildup of toxic pollutants in the body. In chronic fatigue syndrome, it is critical to reduce this burden, as these pollutants reduce systemic levels of antioxidants by blocking enzymes which produce antioxidants. As previously described, this depletion of antioxidants can result in immune system dysfunction and immune system sensitization to substances which we may be exposed to on a daily basis. Chronic fatigue syndrome patients, as previously demonstrated, have high levels of reactivity to multiple metals. If an individual develops an allergic type reaction to one of the metals or substances that make up the toxic burden in the body, this would lead to never-ending immune system activation, causing the symptoms we see associated with chronic fatigue syndrome. I suffered from chronic fatigue syndrome, which was triggered by taking a pharmaceutical drug. Over the months and years, the condition consistently got worse, despite trying conventional and countless alternative treatments. My condition got worse to the point I became almost completely non-functional, and I could hardly walk far enough to leave the house. I made every effort to eat healthy, take antioxidants, supplements, herbs, and reduced ongoing exposures to pollutants and stresses, but I kept getting worse. It was only once I came to the conclusion that the problem was related to something stuck inside me that I started to make progress. I then started researching and trialing many methods to rid myself of this burden of environmental pollutants. Over the months, I started noticing small improvements, which was huge progress compared to unrelenting deterioration. I further researched detoxification methods and continued to implement various detoxification techniques, and I continued to improve. Within a year, I was vastly improved and was almost fully functional again. I continued with these detoxification techniques, and all my symptoms associated with chronic fatigue syndrome disappeared. The process cannot be rushed, as these environmental pollutants are highly toxic, and mobilizing them into circulation will almost certainly result in some worsening of symptoms, especially if your immune system is sensitized to these pollutants. Detoxifying too fast can also overburden excretory organs and potentially harm them. After I recovered from chronic fatigue syndrome, I put together a guide on how you can detoxify your body using herbs, minerals, amino acids, vitamins, pharmaceutical chelators, and other methods. This guide was put together based on reviewing over 1,000 research studies. The book itself contains over 50 pages of references to the research discussed in the book. The book guides you through the process of removing a vast array of persistent environmental pollutants from your body. By following this guide, you should notice your state of health, vigor, and vitality improve month by month. Click the link below for further information on the book and the detoxification agents used in the book. Also, give this video a like if you enjoyed the information and to help others find this content. Thank you.